My name is Margaret Langston. I'm 86 years old. This story is being shared thanks to a young nurse named Taylor who works at Sunnyvale Retirement Home, where I now live. She's the one who helped me contact this channel and record my story. They thought I would stay quiet, that I would just accept what happened and fade away like so many elderly people do, but I didn't. And now, I'm going to tell you everything, including what happened when I took the microphone in front of my whole town. This isn't just another sad story about getting old. This is about betrayal from the people who should have loved me most. My own daughter. The same one I raised alone after my husband passed. The same one who told everyone she was a loving, devoted daughter while secretly planning to abandon me. 3 months ago, my daughter Cheryl told me we were going on a special outing. "Put on your best dress, Mom," she said. "We're going somewhere nice." What she didn't mention was that I wouldn't be coming back home. Ever. Before I continue with my story, I want you to know something. I'm not telling this for pity. I'm telling this because the truth matters. Because too many elderly people are silenced, forgotten, and pushed aside. And because what my daughter did should never happen to anyone else. Before we go on, don't forget to subscribe. You'll automatically be entered to win $2,000. No form, just click subscribe, and you're in. We'll pick the winner on December 23rd, just in time for Christmas. Now, let me tell you how it all began, before my life was turned upside down. I spent most of my life in Richmond, Virginia. For 42 years, I taught 3rd grade at Westland Elementary School. If you grew up in Richmond during those decades, you might have been one of my students. I loved teaching, watching children learn to read, to write, to understand the world around them. There's nothing more rewarding. My husband, Robert, was a kind man, an accountant who loved numbers as much as I loved books. We had 2 children, Cheryl and David. David moved to California after college and visits only on holidays. Cheryl stayed in Richmond, married a local businessman named Greg, and had 2 children of her own. When Robert died 7 years ago from heart failure, my world changed. After 53 years of marriage, I was alone for the first time since I was 22. Our house felt too big, too empty. The silence was deafening. Cheryl suggested I sell my house and move in with her family. "It's the sensible thing to do, Mom," she said. "You shouldn't be alone at your age." At first, I resisted. I valued my independence, my routines, my space. But after falling in the shower one morning and lying there for nearly an hour before I could reach the phone, I reconsidered. Maybe Cheryl was right. Maybe I shouldn't be alone anymore. So I sold the house where Robert and I had built our life together. The house where we'd raised our children, celebrated Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries. The house filled with memories in every corner. I sold it for less than it was worth because Cheryl said the market was down and we needed to move quickly. I kept only what would fit in one bedroom: some clothes, photo albums, my collection of classic novels, Robert's watch, my wedding ring, and a few treasured keepsakes. Everything else, furniture, dishes, linens, the grandfather clock that had been in Robert's family for generations, was either sold or given away. Cheryl handled most of it. She said it was to spare me the emotional stress, but now I wonder if there were other reasons. Life at Cheryl's house was comfortable enough, I suppose. I had a small bedroom on the 1st floor, converted from what had once been a home office. There was a bathroom nearby that I didn't have to share. The house was in an upscale neighborhood with manicured lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. Everything matched, everything was perfect, just like Cheryl always wanted. My days fell into a routine. I would wake early, make coffee, and read the newspaper before anyone else was up. I'd prepare breakfast for the family, pancakes on Sundays, oatmeal or eggs on weekdays. I'd help with laundry, dusting, whatever needed doing. In the afternoons, I'd read or watch television with the volume low so as not to disturb anyone. When the grandchildren came home from school, I'd help with homework if they needed it, which was rare. They were always rushing off to soccer practice or dance lessons or friends' houses. Dinner was usually quiet. Greg would talk about work, Cheryl about church committees or neighborhood gossip. The children would stare at their phones under the table, thinking no one noticed. Sometimes I'd share a story from my teaching days, but I could see their eyes glaze over. After a while, I stopped trying. "That was before your time, Mom," Cheryl would say with a tight smile. "Things are different now." At night, I'd lie in bed listening to the sounds of a house that wasn't mine, wondering if Robert would recognize the woman I'd become, wondering if I recognized myself. For 3 years, this was my life. Not unhappy exactly, but not quite living either. Existing in the margins of someone else's story. The changes came gradually. Small things at first. Cheryl started scheduling her charity committee meetings during times she knew I'd be watching my programs. Greg began complaining about the grocery bills, eyeing my medications on the counter with a frown. The grandchildren stopped saying good morning, then stopped acknowledging me altogether unless prompted by their mother. "Teenagers," Cheryl would say with a shrug. "You know how they are." But I knew it wasn't just teenage moodiness. They were following their parents' lead. I started noticing whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Tense glances between Cheryl and Greg at dinner. Phone calls taken in hushed tones behind closed doors. One evening, I overheard them in the kitchen. "We can't keep going like this," Greg was saying. "The medical bills alone are eating us alive." "What do you expect me to do?" Cheryl replied. "She's my mother." "Your brother needs to step up. Why should we bear the entire burden? David says he can't afford to help right now, and you know what the market's like. We can't sell the house in this economy." "There are other options," Greg said, his voice dropping even lower. "Like what?" "Like Sunnyvale. Nancy Harrison's mother is there. She says it's very nice. Mom would never agree to go to a nursing home. You know how stubborn she is about her independence." There was a long pause, and then Greg said something that chilled me to the bone. "Who says she needs to agree?" I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Surely I had misunderstood. Surely my own daughter wouldn't. But in my heart, I knew. I had become a burden, an expense, a problem to be solved. The next morning at breakfast, Cheryl was unusually cheerful. She poured me an extra cup of coffee, asked about my plans for the day, even suggested we go shopping that weekend. "It's been ages since we had a girls' day out," she said brightly. I smiled and nodded, playing along. But I noticed how she avoided my eyes, how her smile never quite reached them, how her fingers tapped nervously on the table. She didn't know that I knew, that I had heard them, that I understood what was coming. For the next few weeks there was a strange tension in the house. Cheryl was alternately overly attentive and completely absent. Greg barely spoke to me at all. The children seemed confused by the shifting atmosphere but said nothing. I considered confronting them, telling them I'd overheard their conversation, asking if they really thought so little of me after everything. But something held me back. Pride, perhaps, or fear of what would happen if I forced the issue. So I waited, watched, prepared myself as best I could. And then, one Sunday morning in April, Cheryl knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom," she said with that too bright smile, "I have a surprise for you. We're going on a special outing today, just you and me." "Where are we going?" I asked, already knowing it wouldn't be the truth. "It's a surprise," she said, "but wear something nice. You deserve a treat." As I got dressed in my best navy blue dress and pearl earrings, I looked around the small room that had been my home for 3 years. Something told me I wouldn't be seeing it again. She didn't say it, but I knew. I had become a burden. And today was the day they would solve that problem. That Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. One of those perfect spring days in Virginia when the dogwoods are blooming and the air smells fresh and new. Ironic, isn't it? How the most beautiful days can sometimes hold the ugliest truths. I woke up early, as I always did. Old habits from decades of teaching. My body never learned to sleep in, even in retirement. Usually, I'd be the first one up, making coffee for everyone. But that morning, the kitchen was already bustling when I came downstairs. Cheryl was at the stove, making pancakes, my favorite with blueberries folded into the batter. Greg was reading the newspaper at the table, more relaxed than I'd seen him in weeks. The children were nowhere to be seen, probably still asleep. It was, after all, only 7:30 on a Sunday. "Good morning, Mom," Cheryl said with a smile that seemed a little too bright. "I thought I'd make your favorite breakfast today." "That's nice, dear," I replied, watching her carefully. What's the occasion? Do I need an occasion to do something nice for my mother? She asked, flipping a pancake with more force than necessary. Greg glanced up from his paper, gave me a tight nod, then disappeared behind the business section again. We ate in relative silence. The pancakes were good, but I barely tasted them. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that made my stomach knot. I'd felt it building for weeks, ever since I overheard that conversation in the kitchen. After breakfast, Cheryl cleared the plates and then sat back down across from me. "Mom, I've been thinking," she began, folding her hands on the table. "You've been cooped up in this house for too long, always taking care of us, helping with the chores. You deserve a break." "I don't mind helping," I said. "It gives me purpose." "I know, but still, you're 86. You should be enjoying your golden years, not worrying about laundry and dishes." Greg suddenly stood up, folded his newspaper with deliberate precision, and left the room without a word. I watched him go, noting the stiff set of his shoulders. "So," Cheryl continued, drawing my attention back to her, "I've planned a special day for us. Just you and me. A mother-daughter outing." "That sounds lovely," I said, though the knot in my stomach tightened. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "But put on something nice, Mom. You deserve a treat." I nodded and went back to my room to get ready. As I dressed in my navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to Robert's funeral and kept for special occasions since, I tried to calm my nerves. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe they weren't planning what I feared. Maybe this was just a genuine attempt by my daughter to spend quality time with me. But deep down, I knew better. I took a little extra time with my appearance that morning. Applied my coral lipstick carefully, put on my pearl earrings, a gift from Robert on our 50th anniversary. Spritzed a bit of the Elizabeth Arden perfume I saved for special occasions. If this was to be my last day in this house, I wanted to leave with dignity. I packed a small handbag with essentials, my reading glasses, a handkerchief, the locket with Robert's picture, and the small leather-bound prayer book I'd carried for decades. Just in case. When I came back downstairs, Cheryl was waiting by the door, car keys in hand. She looked me up and down, and for a moment, something like guilt flickered across her face. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said softly. "Thank you, dear. The pearls were Dad's gift, weren't they?" I touched them gently. "Yes, for our 50th. She nodded, then quickly turned away, but not before I saw the moisture in her eyes. Whatever she was planning, at least it wasn't easy for her. Small comfort, but I took what I could get. The house was strangely quiet as we prepared to leave. No sign of Greg or the children. "Aren't we saying goodbye to everyone?" I asked, looking around. "Oh, they're busy," Cheryl said vaguely. "Greg took the kids to soccer practice. On a Sunday morning, before church?" It didn't make sense, but I didn't press the issue. As we walked to the car, I noticed a small suitcase in the trunk before Cheryl quickly slammed it shut. My heart sank. So my suspicions were correct. This wasn't just a day trip. The drive was tense. Cheryl kept up a stream of forced cheerfulness, pointing out landmarks we passed as if I hadn't lived in Richmond my entire life. I responded with appropriate murmurs, watching the familiar streets of my neighborhood give way to parts of town I rarely visited. "You know," Cheryl said after a particularly long silence, "I've been thinking about how hard it must be for you, living with us. Our house is so busy, the kids are so loud. You never get any peace and quiet." "I don't mind the noise," I said. "It's nice to be around family." She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Still, at your age, you deserve some rest, some proper care." There it was, the first hint of what was to come. "I thought that's what family was for," I said quietly. "Caring for each other." Cheryl didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned up the radio, some bland, easy listening station playing songs from my era. As if that would soften the blow of what she was about to do. We drove for about 40 minutes, leaving the familiar neighborhoods behind, heading toward the outskirts of town. I noticed we were approaching an area known for its medical facilities and retirement communities. My suspicions were confirmed when Cheryl turned onto Maple Avenue, where several assisted living facilities were located. "Cheryl," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Where exactly are we going?" "Just a place I want to show you," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "A nice place. You'll see. Is it Sunnyvale Retirement Home by any chance? Her head snapped toward me, eyes wide with surprise. How did you— I heard you and Greg talking, I said simply. Weeks ago, in the kitchen. Color drained from her face. Mom, it's not what you think. Isn't it? You're taking me to a nursing home without telling me, pretending it's a special outing. What exactly am I misunderstanding? Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. We were going to tell you. Today, after you saw how nice it is. So your plan was to trick me into visiting, then spring it on me that I'm staying? Was I supposed to be grateful for the deception? It's not a deception, she protested weakly. It's easing you into the idea. By lying to me, by packing a suitcase without telling me, by sending Greg and the children away so they wouldn't have to see your mother's face when she realized she was being abandoned. That's not fair, Cheryl said, her voice rising. We're not abandoning you. Sunnyvale is a beautiful facility. It costs a fortune. Do you know that? We're using the money from your house. My house, I interrupted. The one you convinced me to sell for less than market value. The one whose proceeds were supposed to support me in my old age. She fell silent at that, her lips pressed into a thin line. We turned into a long driveway lined with carefully manicured shrubs. At the end stood a large white building with a sign reading Sunnyvale Retirement Home in elegant script. It looked pleasant enough from the outside, modern, clean, surrounded by gardens. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. As Cheryl parked the car, I took a deep breath and asked one last question. Did you ever consider just talking to me? Telling me the truth? Giving me a choice in my own life? She stared straight ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. We knew you'd say no, she whispered. And in that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't just about money or space or convenience. It was about control. My daughter had decided what was best for me, without my input, without my consent. Because to her, I was no longer a person with agency and dignity. I was a problem to be solved. Well, I said, reaching for the door handle. Since we're here, let's see this place you've chosen for me. I stepped out of the car into the bright spring sunshine, my head held high, my pearl earrings catching the light. Whatever happened next, I would face it with the same dignity and strength that had carried me through 86 years of life. Little did Cheryl know, this wouldn't be the last surprise between us. Sunnyvale Retirement Home looked like something from a brochure. Manicured lawns, flower beds bursting with spring colors, a fountain bubbling cheerfully in the circular driveway. The building itself was impressive. 3 stories of red brick with white trim, large windows, and a grand entrance with columns. If you didn't know better, you might mistake it for an upscale hotel or a small liberal arts college. As we walked toward the entrance, I noticed other details. The subtle security features, cameras mounted discreetly under the eaves, keypad entry systems at the side doors, the tall wrought iron fence encircling the property. Not a prison exactly, but certainly designed to keep residents in as much as to keep intruders out. Cheryl walked slightly ahead of me, her steps quick and purposeful. She'd done this before, I realized. She'd been here to arrange everything, to sign papers, to prepare my cell. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, welcoming us into a lobby that tried very hard to look like anything but a nursing home. Plush armchairs, tasteful artwork, a grand piano in the corner. The smell gave it away, though. Beneath the artificial scent of potpourri, that unmistakable clinical odor of disinfectant and medication, a woman in a tailored suit approached us with a practiced smile. Mrs. Bennett, how lovely to see you again. And this must be Margaret. She extended her hand to me. I'm Patricia Wilkins, the Director of Resident Services here at Sunnyvale. We're so pleased to welcome you to our community. I shook her hand, noting how she addressed me by my first name while using Cheryl's married name, the first of many indignities to come. Thank you, I said simply, unwilling to play along with the charade that I was here willingly. Why don't I give you both a tour? Patricia suggested, though her eyes flickered to Cheryl. Unless you'd prefer to handle the paperwork first? The tour would be great, Cheryl said quickly. I want Mom to see how wonderful this place is before we finalize everything. Patricia nodded knowingly. Of course. Let's start with the common areas. If you're still watching my story, I want to thank you. Not everyone takes the time to listen to what happens to the elderly in this country. Before I continue, I want to remind you to subscribe to this channel, not just to hear stories like mine, but because you'll automatically be entered to win $2,000. No forms to fill out. Just click subscribe, and you're in the drawing. They'll pick a winner on December 23rd, just in time for Christmas. Maybe you could use that money to help an elderly loved one in your life. Now, back to that day. The day my life changed forever. What followed was a carefully choreographed presentation of Sunnyvale's many amenities. The dining room with its white tablecloths and restaurant-quality meals. The library with its modest collection of large print books and outdated magazines. The activity room where residents could enjoy supervised arts and crafts or watch approved movies on the large screen TV. The small chapel that hosted services for various denominations. Throughout the tour, we passed other residents. Some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, a few ambulatory like myself. Most had that vacant look I'd come to recognize in many elderly, the resigned expression of people who had accepted that their lives were essentially over, just waiting for the final curtain. A few, though, watched us with sharp, knowing eyes. They recognized what was happening. They'd been through it themselves. "And now," Patricia said brightly, "let's see your suite, Margaret. It's one of our premium rooms with a lovely view of the garden." We followed her down a long corridor, our footsteps muffled by industrial-grade carpeting in a forgettable beige. The walls were lined with identical doors, each with a small nameplate and a shallow shelf where residents could place personal items to help identify their rooms. Many were empty. Patricia stopped at room 217 and used a keycard to unlock the door. "Here we are," she announced, swinging the door open with a flourish. The suite was a single room about 15 feet square, with an attached bathroom. It had basic furniture, a twin bed, a nightstand, a small desk and chair, a television mounted on the wall, and a narrow wardrobe. The walls were painted a pale yellow that I supposed was meant to be cheerful. The window overlooked a section of the garden, as promised, though the view was partially obstructed by a large oak tree. "It's all been prepared according to your specifications, Mrs. Bennet," Patricia said to Cheryl. "The bed is made up with the linens you provided, and we've placed the photo frames just as you requested." I walked over to the nightstand where several framed photographs had been artfully arranged. A family portrait from Christmas 2 years ago. My wedding photo with Robert. A picture of my grandchildren when they were younger and still smiled in my presence. "When did you bring these?" I asked Cheryl, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Last week." "I wanted your room to feel homey from the start." "Last week." While I was still living under her roof, believing I was a welcome member of the family, she had been here, preparing for my removal. "I'll give you two a moment," Patricia said, backing toward the door. "Mrs. Bennet, when you're ready, we can complete the intake process at my office. Just come back to the front desk." The door closed behind her, leaving Cheryl and me alone in what was to be my new home. "It's nice, isn't it?" Cheryl said, her voice too bright, too brittle. "Much better than those awful places you see on TV. And you'll have your privacy here, your own bathroom. No stairs to climb." I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling the institutional mattress beneath me. Not uncomfortable, but not the memory foam I'd grown accustomed to at Cheryl's house. Not the bed I'd shared with Robert for 5 decades. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked quietly. Cheryl busied herself straightening the already straight photographs. "It's not like that, Mom. We've been discussing options for your care for a while now. This opportunity just came up recently." "Opportunity," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you trick your mother and abandon her in a nursing home?" "I'm not abandoning you," Cheryl protested, color rising in her cheeks. "This is a premier facility. Do you have any idea how much this costs? How many strings Greg had to pull to get you in here?" "I never asked for any of this," I said. "I would have been perfectly happy in a small apartment of my own, with my independence intact." "You can't live alone anymore, Mom. You're 86 years old. You need supervision, medical care." "I need my family," I interrupted. "I need honesty. I need to be treated like a human being with thoughts and feelings and choices, not a problem to be solved. Cheryl sighed heavily, as if I were being unreasonable. You'll understand eventually. This is for the best. You'll make friends here, participate in activities. It'll be like a permanent vacation. A permanent vacation. As if being stripped of my autonomy, separated from my family, and placed among strangers was something to look forward to. I think you should go now, I said, suddenly very tired. You probably have a lot of paperwork to sign, officially washing your hands of me. Mom, don't be like that. I'll visit all the time. We all will. I didn't respond. We both knew it was another lie. Cheryl hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my cheek. I remained perfectly still, not returning the gesture. I love you, Mom, she whispered. I hope someday you'll understand why we did this. She walked to the door, paused as if she might say something else, then slipped out without looking back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the unfamiliar room that was now my world. Outside my window, I could see part of the garden and the wrought iron fence beyond it. As I watched, a staff member entered a code on the keypad, and the gate swung open to allow a delivery truck through. When the truck passed, the gate swung shut again with a definitive click. That sound, that soft, final click, said everything. I stepped out of my daughter's car into this place, and when the gate closed behind me, I knew I had been left. Left with a suitcase I hadn't packed. Left with photos arranged by the daughter who no longer wanted me in her home. Left with the crushing realization that after 86 years of living, loving, working, and caring for others, I had been reduced to an inconvenience. A burden to be shipped away and forgotten. But as I sat there in the sterile quiet of room 217, something else stirred within me. Not just grief or betrayal, though those were certainly present. Something harder, sharper, something like resolve. Cheryl thought this was the end of my story, that I would quietly accept my fate, fade into the background of her life, and eventually disappear altogether. She was wrong. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The first week at Sunnyvale passed in a blur of intake assessments, orientation sessions, and mind-numbing routine. Blood pressure checks every morning. Medications dispensed 3 times daily, whether I needed them or not. Meals at precisely 8 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. in the dining room, where residents were seated according to their care levels rather than by choice or compatibility. I was assigned to Table 7 with 3 other women who had been at Sunnyvale for various lengths of time. Martha, a former librarian with severe arthritis, had been there for 5 years. Elaine, who had mild dementia but moments of startling clarity, for 3 years. And Dorothy, a retired nurse who had moved in just 2 months earlier after a stroke left her with a slight paralysis on her left side. "How long until your daughter visits?" Dorothy asked me on my 3rd day, as we picked at a bland chicken casserole. "She said she'd come this weekend," I replied. Martha and Elaine exchanged a knowing look. "That's what they all say," Martha said gently. "Don't hold your breath." She was right. The weekend came and went, with no sign of Cheryl, no call, no explanation, nothing. The following Monday, I asked to use the phone at the nurse's station to call her. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a message, trying to keep my voice steady. "Cheryl, it's Mom. I was expecting you this weekend. Please call me back when you can." She didn't. I tried again on Wednesday and Friday and the following Monday. Each time, straight to voicemail. Each time, no return call. Meanwhile, life at Sunnyvale settled into a rhythm of soul-crushing monotony. Wake up, breakfast, morning activities, usually something infantilizing like coloring or simple crafts. Lunch, afternoon activities, perhaps a movie from the 1950s or a bingo game with prizes of stale candy. Dinner, evening social hour in the common room, which consisted mostly of watching whatever was on the communal television. Lights out at 9 p.m., as if we were children at summer camp. Some residents seemed content with this existence. Many were so medicated or mentally diminished that they hardly seemed aware of their surroundings. Others, like myself, felt the indignity of it all keenly, but had few options for resistance. The one bright spot in my days was the library. Small and outdated as it was, It offered a refuge of sorts. I would spend hours there, reading or simply sitting in silence, away from the forced cheer of the activity coordinators and the constant supervision of the nursing staff. It was in the library, 2 weeks after my arrival, that I first saw Cheryl again, or rather, an image of her. I was flipping through a local community magazine when I came across a feature about volunteer work at First Presbyterian Church. And there she was, smiling broadly for the camera, serving food at a homeless shelter. The caption read, "Cheryl Bennett, chair of the church's Community Outreach Committee, has dedicated countless hours to serving Richmond's less fortunate." "I believe in giving back," says Bennett. "My mother taught me the importance of caring for others, especially those who can't care for themselves." The hypocrisy of it burned like acid. There she was, presenting herself as a paragon of Christian charity, while her own mother sat abandoned in a nursing home, using me, my teachings, my values, to burnish her public image, even as she refused to answer my phone calls. I tore the page out and took it back to my room, pinning it to my bulletin board as a reminder. A reminder of what? I wasn't sure yet. But something was forming in my mind, a plan still too nebulous to articulate. That evening, I tried calling again. This time, Greg answered. "Margaret," he said, his voice flat. "How are you settling in?" "Where's Cheryl?" I asked, ignoring his question. "She's at a church committee meeting. She's very busy these days." "Too busy to return her mother's calls? Too busy to visit, as she promised?" He sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced, rather than genuinely concerned. "Look, Margaret, these transitions take time. Cheryl is processing. She feels guilty, even though we both know this is the best solution for everyone." "Best for whom exactly? Certainly not for me." "You're getting excellent care at Sunnyvale, care we couldn't provide at home." "What I'm getting is warehoused," I replied, my voice steady despite my anger. "And Cheryl is salving her conscience by serving strangers at the homeless shelter while ignoring her own mother's calls." There was a moment of silence, then. "I'll tell her you called. Will you? Or will that be another lie?" He hung up without responding. If you believe the elderly deserve better treatment than this, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Not only will you hear more stories that need to be told, but you'll automatically be entered to win that $2,000 on December 23rd. It's their way of saying, thank you for listening to voices that are too often silenced. And maybe that money could help an elderly person in your own life this Christmas. The third week brought a package from Cheryl. No visit, no call, just a box delivered to the front desk. Inside were some clothes I'd left behind, a few more framed photos, and a card with a pre-printed message. "Thinking of you." Beneath it, Cheryl had written, "Hope you're settling in well. We're all fine here. Very busy with church activities and the kids' end-of-year events. We'll try to visit soon. Love, Cheryl." Not a word of apology. Not a response to my calls. Just empty platitudes and excuses. It was around this time that I discovered Cheryl's social media presence. I'd never been much for computers or smartphones, but Sunnyvale had a small computer center where residents could access the internet under supervision. One of the activity coordinators, a young woman named Brittany, helped me set up an email account and showed me how to use Facebook. "Most residents use it to keep in touch with family," she explained cheerfully. "See photos of the grandkids, that sort of thing." What I found instead was a carefully curated version of my daughter's life that bore little resemblance to reality. Photos of smiling family gatherings where my absence wasn't acknowledged, posts about honoring our elders and family values, status updates about her volunteer work and church leadership. And then, most galling of all, a post from just 3 days after she'd left me at Sunnyvale. "Mom is finally at peace. Her decision to move to assisted living wasn't easy, but we respect her choice. So grateful for the wonderful staff who are caring for her now." Her decision? Her choice? It was a lie so blatant, so complete, that for a moment I could only stare at the screen in disbelief. And beneath it, dozens of comments praising Cheryl's compassion and support during this difficult transition. "You're such a wonderful daughter, Cheryl. Your mom raised you right." Not many children would be so supportive of their parents' choices. Each comment was like a knife twisting deeper. Not only had she abandoned me, but she was now rewriting history to cast herself as the supportive daughter and me as the willing participant in my own isolation. The rage I felt in that moment was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Not the hot, immediate anger of an argument or insult, but something colder, more deliberate. A clarity of purpose that cut through the fog of grief and betrayal. I printed the Facebook post and added it to my bulletin board next to the magazine article. Evidence of Cheryl's deception, not just of me, but of everyone who knew her. That night, as I lay in my narrow bed listening to the institutional sounds of Sunnyvale, the squeak of nurses' shoes in the corridor, the distant call button from someone's room, the hum of the building's systems, I made a decision. I would not fade away quietly, as Cheryl expected. I would not become one of those forgotten residents who sit staring at walls, waiting for visits that never come. I would not allow her to rewrite our story to suit her public image. I would find a way to tell the truth, my truth, and if that truth shattered the carefully constructed facade of Cheryl's life, well, she should have thought of that before she closed the gate behind me. On my 4th week at Sunnyvale, everything changed when Taylor Anderson started her first shift. She was different from the other staff, younger, with bright purple streaks in her dark hair, partially hidden beneath her uniform cap, and a small nose ring she wasn't supposed to wear on duty. I first noticed her at medication time. Most nurses dispensed pills with robotic efficiency, barely making eye contact. Taylor looked each resident in the eye, used their names, asked how they were feeling. Small things, but they made a difference. When she came to my room, she checked my chart and frowned. "Mrs. Langston, I see you're on Ativan. Are you having anxiety issues?" "No more than anyone else who's been dumped in a place against their will," I replied, not bothering to hide my bitterness. Instead of the dismissive response I'd grown accustomed to, Taylor pulled up a chair and sat down. "Tell me about that." Something in her direct gaze, the genuine interest in her voice, broke through the wall I'd built around myself. Before I knew it, I was telling her everything, how Cheryl had tricked me, how she'd gone silent afterward, how she was portraying herself as a devoted daughter on social media while ignoring my existence. Taylor listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to outrage. "That's messed up," she said when I finished. "And sadly, not that uncommon. I've seen it happen to other residents. Is there anything I can do?" I asked. "Legally, I mean." She sighed. "It's complicated. Your daughter probably has power of attorney?" "I signed something. She said it was just a formality in case of emergency. That's usually how it happens. They get you to sign away your rights before you understand what's happening." Taylor tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her knee. "But just because you can't fight it legally doesn't mean you're powerless." "What do you mean?" "You still have your voice, Mrs. Langston. Your story. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing of all." She had to continue her rounds, but before leaving, she made me a promise. "I'll come back after my shift. We'll talk more." True to her word, Taylor returned that evening. She was off duty, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt with some band name I didn't recognize. She brought a notebook and pen. "I've been thinking about your situation all day," she said, sitting cross-legged on the chair beside my bed. "Have you been keeping a journal?" I shook my head. "Just collecting evidence." I showed her my bulletin board with Cheryl's social media posts and the magazine article. "Good start," she nodded approvingly. "But I think you should write down everything. How you ended up here, what was promised versus what happened, how your daughter is portraying it publicly. What good would that do?" "It could do a lot of good. For you, processing what happened. And maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe for others too." "What do you mean?" Taylor leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Mrs. Langston, your story isn't unique. Elder abandonment happens all the time, but people don't talk about it. It happens in shadows, behind closed doors, with polite fictions to cover the truth." She handed me the notebook. "Start writing. Everything you remember. Don't worry about how it sounds or if it's perfect. Just get it all down." I took the notebook skeptically, but promised I would try. That night, I began writing. Hesitantly at first, then with increasing fluency as memories and emotions poured out. I wrote about my life before Sunnyvale, about Cheryl's betrayal, about the weeks of silence that followed. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes grew heavy. The next day, Taylor came to check on me during her shift. "Did you write?" she asked. I nodded and showed her the pages I'd filled. She read them, her expression serious. When she finished, she looked up at me with something like respect in her eyes. "This is powerful, Mrs. Langston. Really powerful. Would you mind if I read more when you've written it?" For the next week, I wrote, and Taylor read. Sometimes she'd ask questions or suggest I elaborate on certain points. Other times, she'd just listen as I read passages aloud, nodding in understanding or shaking her head in disgust at Cheryl's actions. It was during one of these sessions that Taylor made a suggestion that would change everything. "Why don't you say it publicly?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your words, your truth. Why keep it in this notebook where only we can see it? Why not share it with others?" I laughed humorlessly. "Who would listen to an old woman in a nursing home?" "You'd be surprised," Taylor said. "People are hungry for authentic stories, for truth, especially when it exposes hypocrisy." She pulled out her phone and showed me a website where people shared personal stories, confessions, revelations, exposés. Some had hundreds of thousands of views. "You could reach people, Mrs. Langston, not just with your story, but with your voice, your dignity." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. To speak my truth publicly, to shed light on what had happened to me, and by extension, what happened to so many elderly people who couldn't speak for themselves. "I wouldn't even know how to start," I admitted. "I could help you," Taylor offered. "I have some experience with digital storytelling. We could record your story, edit it, share it anonymously if you prefer." "No," I said firmly. "If I do this, I want my name on it. My face, my voice, no hiding." Taylor smiled, a hint of admiration in her expression. Even better. That weekend, Taylor came in on her day off with recording equipment, a small camera, a microphone, lights. We transformed my sterile room into a makeshift studio. She helped me choose a simple outfit, did my hair, and positioned me by the window where the natural light was best. "Just speak from the heart," she advised. "Imagine you're talking to someone who needs to hear your story, who might be going through the same thing." The red light on the camera blinked on, and I began to speak, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence. I told my story without embellishment, without exaggeration. The stark truth was powerful enough. When I finished, Taylor wiped away a tear. "That was perfect, Mrs. Langston. Absolutely perfect." As she packed up her equipment, a notification chimed on her phone. She checked it, and her eyes widened. "What is it?" I asked. "Something you should see." She handed me her phone. It was Cheryl's Facebook page, a new post with a photo of her standing in front of our church holding a plaque. The caption read, "Deeply honored to be named Volunteer of the Year by First Presbyterian. The awards ceremony next Sunday will be especially meaningful as they're recognizing my work with the elderly community. As many of you know, caring for our seniors has become my personal mission since my own mother's transition to assisted living." The comments below were effusive in their praise. "No one deserves this more than you, Cheryl. Your dedication to the elderly is inspiring. Such a wonderful example of putting family values into action." I stared at the screen, speechless with rage and disbelief. My daughter, who hadn't visited me once in a month, who ignored my calls, who tricked me into coming to this place, was now being celebrated for her work with the elderly community. Was using my transition to burnish her reputation as a caring, devoted daughter? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "When is this ceremony?" I asked, my voice tight. "Next Sunday at 2 p.m., Taylor read from the post. "Open to the community." A plan began forming in my mind, nebulous at first, then crystallizing into something clear and definite. "Taylor," I said slowly, "would you be working next Sunday?" "Morning shift, yes, I'm off at 2. Why?" "Because I need your help with something important." I looked up at her, determination hardening within me. "I need to attend that ceremony." Taylor's eyes widened as she understood what I was suggesting. "Mrs. Langston, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "She wanted applause," I said, looking back at the smiling photo of my daughter. "I'll give her something to remember." Taylor was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Why don't you say it publicly?" She repeated my earlier question. "Would anyone care?" I met her gaze steadily. "They will now." Planning my appearance at Cheryl's award ceremony required precision and secrecy. Sunnyvale residents weren't prisoners exactly, but we weren't free to come and go as we pleased either. Scheduled outings required approval, transportation arrangements, and often a family member's involvement, none of which I could request without raising suspicions. "We'll need to be creative," Taylor said during our next planning session. She'd brought me a takeout coffee from the real world, a small luxury that reminded me life existed beyond Sunnyvale's walls. "Sunnyvale has a strict sign-out policy," I pointed out. "I can't just walk out the door." "No, but you can have a visitor take you to lunch," Taylor replied with a meaningful look. "Residents are allowed 4-hour passes with approved visitors. And who would this visitor be? Cheryl is my only approved family contact, and my friends don't know I'm here. She told everyone I made this decision myself, remember?" Taylor took a sip of her coffee, her eyes twinkling. "I have Sundays off, and as your primary care nurse, I'm allowed to register as an approved visitor. It's a policy meant for staff who develop special bonds with residents and want to maintain those relationships on their own time." "Would you really do that for me?" I asked, touched by her willingness to help. "Absolutely. What they did to you was wrong, Mrs. Langston, and from what I've seen working here, you're not the only one. People should know the truth." Over the next few days, we refined our plan. Taylor submitted the paperwork to become my approved visitor. We researched the church's location and planned our timing. The ceremony was at 2 p.m., but we'd arrive at 1:30 to ensure we got seats. "What exactly do you plan to do when we get there?" Taylor asked one evening as we reviewed our strategy. "I'd been thinking about this constantly. I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted, "but I want to be there in person when she accepts this award for her supposed work with the elderly while her own mother sits abandoned in a nursing home. You could confront her," Taylor suggested. "Stand up during the ceremony." The image was compelling. Me, rising from the pews, speaking truth to power. But something about it didn't feel right. "I don't want to disrupt a church service," I said finally. "That's not who I am. But I do want to be seen. I want her to know, that I'm not just going to disappear quietly." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes just being present is the most powerful statement, especially when everyone thinks you're tucked away out of sight." As Sunday approached, we gathered what I'd need. Taylor brought me my best dress from home, a navy blue sheath I'd worn to my granddaughter's high school graduation last year. She helped me style my hair the way I used to wear it, not the simplified version the Sunnyvale staff preferred for ease of care. She even brought makeup, subtle, age-appropriate, but a far cry from the bare face I'd been presenting to the world at Sunnyvale. "You look amazing," she said when we'd finished. "Strong, dignified." I looked in the mirror and hardly recognized myself. After a month of institutional life, of being treated as less than, of fading into the background, I looked like me again. Margaret Langston, teacher, mother, human being with agency and voice. The Saturday before the ceremony, a complication arose. Taylor called me, her voice tight with worry. "Mrs. Langston, I just saw the full program for tomorrow's service. Cheryl isn't just receiving an award, she's giving a speech about her work with the elderly community and how it's been inspired by her personal experience caring for her mother." A cold fury settled in my chest. "What exactly does the program say?" "A Personal Journey, How Caring for My Mother Taught Me to Serve Others" by Cheryl Bennett, followed by the Volunteer of the Year presentation. The audacity was breathtaking. My daughter, who had tricked me, abandoned me, and ignored me for a month, was going to stand in front of our entire church community and talk about how caring for me had taught her compassion? It was beyond hypocrisy. It was a complete inversion of reality. "This changes things," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I can't just sit there and watch her lie to everyone. Not about this. Not about me." Taylor was silent for a moment. "What are you thinking?" "I'm not sure yet. But bring the voice recorder tomorrow along with the camera. I want to be prepared for whatever happens." That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Cheryl at the pulpit, her voice full of false emotion as she described her journey caring for me. The sympathetic murmurs from the congregation, the admiring glances, all built on a foundation of lies. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. Taylor arrived at 11 a.m. as planned, dressed simply but professionally in slacks and a blouse. She signed me out for a lunch visit, and we walked through Sunnyvale's front doors together, past the security desk, into the bright Virginia sunshine. The simple act of leaving the facility felt revolutionary. For a month, my world had been confined to those walls, those routines, those limitations. Now I was outside, breathing fresh air, sitting in the passenger seat of Taylor's car as she drove us toward First Presbyterian. "Are you nervous?" she asked as we neared the church. "No," I answered, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm ready." First Presbyterian Church had been my spiritual home for over 40 years. I'd taught Sunday school there when my children were young. I'd sung in the choir, served on committees, attended countless services. The familiar stone building with its tall steeple and stained glass windows had been a constant in my life through joys and sorrows. Now, approaching it from Taylor's car, it felt both familiar and strange, like returning to a childhood home now occupied by strangers. We arrived at 1:20, earlier than planned. The parking lot was already filling up. Clearly, this was a well-attended event. Taylor found a spot near the side entrance, the less conspicuous option we'd agreed on. "Ready?" she asked, turning off the engine. I nodded, gathering my purse and the small voice recorder Taylor had brought. We'd decided I would keep it with me, switched on, to document whatever happened. As we walked toward the entrance, I spotted familiar faces. Church members I'd known for decades, parents of children I'd taught, neighbors from my old neighborhood. None of them knew I was at Sunnyvale. All of them, presumably, believed Cheryl's fiction that I had chosen to go there, that I was at peace with the decision. A few people glanced our way, but no one seemed to recognize me immediately. Perhaps they weren't expecting to see me here. Perhaps I looked different enough after a month in Sunnyvale that I'd become invisible in plain sight. We slipped into the sanctuary and found seats in the middle section, about halfway back. Close enough to see clearly, but not so close that Cheryl would immediately spot me when she took the pulpit. The church filled quickly around us. The anticipatory buzz of conversation, the rustling of program papers, the subtle notes from the organ as the musician warmed up, all of it familiar, comforting, yet now overlaid with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with worship. I opened my program. There it was, right after the opening hymn and announcements, a personal journey, how caring for my mother taught me to serve others. Cheryl Bennett, Volunteer of the Year Award presentation. Pastor Michael Davis. "There she is," Taylor whispered, nodding toward the front row. And there was Cheryl, sitting with Greg and the children, dressed in a tasteful pink suit, her hair perfectly styled, her posture radiating confidence and satisfaction. She was chatting with the pastor's wife, smiling and nodding, completely at ease, completely unaware that her carefully constructed narrative was about to be challenged. As the organist began the prelude, a strange calm settled over me. For weeks I'd felt powerless, voiceless, erased from my own story. But sitting here, in this church where I'd spent so much of my life, I felt a reclamation of self, a restoration of purpose. "Are you sure about this?" Taylor asked one last time, her voice barely audible over the music. I met her concerned gaze with steady resolve. "She wanted applause," I said quietly. "I'll give her something to remember." The service began with the familiar rhythms of worship, a hymn, a prayer, announcements about upcoming events. I sat quietly beside Taylor, my hands folded in my lap, the voice recorder tucked discreetly in my purse but switched on, capturing everything. Pastor Michael Davis, a middle-aged man with a kind face who had led our congregation for the past 7 years, stepped to the pulpit after the announcements. "Today is a special day at First Presbyterian," he began, his voice warm with pride. "We're honoring one of our own who exemplifies Christian service and compassion. Before we present the Volunteer of the Year Award, Cheryl Bennett will share how her personal journey caring for her elderly mother inspired her dedication to our community's seniors." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation. Cheryl rose from her seat in the front row, smoothing her pink suit, accepting the pastor's hand as she ascended the 3 steps to the pulpit. She adjusted the microphone, smiled out at the assembled faces, and began to speak. "Thank you, Pastor Davis, for that kind introduction. And thank you to this wonderful church family for the honor you're bestowing today." Her voice was steady, practiced, the voice of someone accustomed to public speaking, to being admired. As many of you know, my mother, Margaret Langston, taught 3rd grade at Westland Elementary for over 40 years. She instilled in her students, and in my brother and me, the values of service, compassion, and respect for all people, regardless of age or circumstance. I felt a surge of anger at hearing my name on her lips, at having my life's work co-opted for her narrative. But I remained still, listening. When Mom began to need more care than we could provide at home, it was a difficult decision for our family. But Mom, with her usual grace and wisdom, chose to move to Sunnyvale Retirement Home, where she could receive the professional care she deserves. The lies flowed so easily from her, each one more audacious than the last. I hadn't chosen anything. There had been no difficult family decision, just deception and abandonment. Watching Mom adapt to this new chapter in her life with dignity and courage inspired me. If she could face aging with such grace, how could I not do more for others in similar circumstances? Beside me, Taylor made a small, disgusted sound. Several people in nearby pews nodded approvingly at Cheryl's words, completely unaware of the truth. That's when I felt called to expand our church's outreach to local nursing homes, to bring companionship, spiritual comfort, and a sense of community to seniors who might otherwise feel forgotten. The irony was almost too much to bear. My own daughter, who had not visited me once since leaving me at Sunnyvale, who had not returned a single phone call, was now presenting herself as a champion of the forgotten elderly. "I visit nursing homes 3 times a week now," Cheryl continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed humility. "I read to residents, pray with them, simply sit and listen to their stories. Because if my mother taught me anything, it's that every life has value, every story matters, and no one should ever feel invisible in their final chapter." A few congregation members dabbed at their eyes. The pastor nodded approvingly. Greg beamed proudly from the front row. "So while I'm deeply honored by this award, the real recognition belongs to my mother, who modeled compassion throughout her life and continues to inspire me every day. Mom, if you were here, I'd say thank you for showing me what it means to serve others with an open heart." The sanctuary erupted in applause. Cheryl smiled modestly, accepting their adoration as her due. And something inside me, something that had been building since the moment that gate closed behind me at Sunnyvale, finally broke free. I stood up. Taylor looked at me in alarm. "Mrs. Langston," she whispered urgently, "are you sure about this?" I nodded once, then stepped into the aisle. The person at the end of our row, an elderly man I didn't recognize, gave me a confused look but moved his legs to let me pass. I walked steadily down the center aisle toward the pulpit, toward my daughter, who was still basking in applause, unaware of my approach. People began to notice. Heads turning, whispers starting, the applause faltering in patches of confusion. Cheryl, sensing the disruption, looked up. Our eyes met across the shortening distance. The blood drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. "Mom?" she said into the microphone, her voice strangled with shock. I continued my deliberate walk to the front of the church. The congregation had fallen almost completely silent now, watching this unexpected drama unfold. "Cheryl," I said, my voice carrying in the hushed sanctuary. What a beautiful speech. She stood frozen at the pulpit, panic evident in her eyes as I climbed the 3 steps to join her. Up close, I could see the beads of sweat forming at her hairline, the rapid pulse at her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning to face the congregation, "I'd like to say a few words if I may. Before you continue watching what happened next, I want to take a quick moment to remind you to subscribe to this channel. Not only will you be supporting stories like mine that need to be told, but you'll automatically be entered to win $2,000 in the December 23rd drawing. No forms to fill out. Just hit subscribe, and you're in. It's their way of thanking you for listening to voices that society often tries to silence. Now back to that moment in the church. Cheryl was still standing there, shock rendering her immobile. Pastor Davis had risen from his chair, clearly uncertain whether to intervene. "Mom," Cheryl hissed, trying to maintain her public smile while panic danced in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I came to hear your speech," I replied calmly, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "About how caring for me inspired your work with the elderly. This isn't the time or place, isn't it? You just told everyone how I chose to move to Sunnyvale, how I faced aging with dignity and courage, how I inspired your ministry to the forgotten elderly. I thought you'd want me here to verify your story." A murmur rippled through the congregation. Confusion. Concern. The first hints of understanding that something was very wrong with the narrative they'd been presented. Cheryl gripped the sides of the pulpit, her knuckles white. "Mom, you're confused. Let's talk about this privately." "I'm not confused, Cheryl. I haven't been confused a day in my life, and you know it. That's why you had to trick me to get me into that place." The murmuring grew louder. Greg had half risen from his seat, his expression a mix of anger and alarm. Pastor Davis approached us, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mrs. Langston, it's wonderful to see you. Perhaps we could continue this conversation after the service?" I turned to him, maintaining my composure. "Pastor Davis, I've been a member of this church for 43 years. I taught your children in Sunday school. I've served on every committee, donated to every fundraiser, prayed in these pews through every joy and sorrow of my adult life. I think I've earned the right to speak my truth here, today, in response to what's just been said about me." Something in my calm dignity must have reached him. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course, Mrs. Langston. Please, thank you." I turned back to the congregation, many of whom were familiar faces, friends of decades who looked utterly bewildered by what was unfolding. I gently moved Cheryl aside and stepped up to the microphone. She didn't resist, perhaps too stunned, or perhaps finally recognizing the magnitude of what she'd done. "My name is Margaret Langston," I began, my voice steady and clear through the church's sound system. "4 weeks ago, my daughter told me we were going on a special outing. 'Put on something nice,' she said. 'You deserve a treat.'" The sanctuary was utterly silent now, hundreds of eyes fixed on me. "She drove me to Sunnyvale Retirement Home. Not for a visit, as she'd led me to believe, but to leave me there. She had already signed all the papers, already moved some of my belongings, already decided my fate without ever consulting me." I paused, letting the words sink in. In the front row, Greg was staring at the floor. My grandchildren looked confused and uncomfortable. When I realized what was happening, I begged to go home. I pleaded with my daughter not to leave me there. But she had made her decision. She walked out, promising to visit that weekend. I looked directly at Cheryl, who had backed away from the pulpit, her carefully constructed public persona crumbling before the eyes of her community. That was 4 weeks ago. She hasn't visited once, hasn't returned my phone calls. The only communication I've received was a package of clothes and a card saying everyone was too busy to visit. The shocked expressions on the faces before me confirmed what I'd suspected. No one in our church community knew the truth. Cheryl had maintained her fiction perfectly, right up until this moment. So when I hear my daughter stand here and speak about compassion for the elderly, about making sure no one feels forgotten in their final chapter, when I hear her claim that caring for me inspired her work, I had to come and bear witness to the truth. I straightened my shoulders, standing as tall as my 86 years would allow. The truth is, I was deceived, abandoned, and erased from my own story. And I refused to be a silent prop in someone else's performance of virtue. The microphone was mine. The moment was mine. And for the first time since that gate closed behind me at Sunnyvale, I was back in control of my own narrative. The silence that followed my words was absolute. You could have heard a hymnal drop in the back row. Hundreds of eyes moved between Cheryl and me, witnessing the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade. Pastor Davis stood frozen beside the pulpit, clearly struggling with how to proceed. This was hardly the uplifting award ceremony he had planned. Greg remained seated in the front row, his face a mask of angry embarrassment. My grandchildren looked mortified, sinking lower in their seats. And Cheryl, my daughter who had always cared so deeply about appearances, about her standing in the community, looked utterly shattered. The careful makeup, the perfect hair, the tasteful pink suit couldn't hide the naked panic in her eyes as she realized that her two worlds, the fiction she'd created and the reality she'd abandoned, had collided spectacularly. "Mom," she finally managed, her voice a harsh whisper that the microphone still caught. "You're embarrassing yourself. You're confused." "I'm not confused, Cheryl," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "And I think you know that. I think everyone here now knows that." I turned back to the congregation, many of whom were people I'd known for decades, fellow teachers, neighbors, friends from church committees and Bible studies. 3 months ago, this woman drove me to a nursing home without telling me. She said it was a peaceful decision. It wasn't. It was betrayal. Murmurs rippled through the sanctuary. Heads shook in disbelief or disappointment. "She told you all I was at peace with this decision. She posted on social media about honoring my choice. She used my absence to build her reputation as a compassionate daughter, a champion for the elderly." I looked directly at Cheryl again. She didn't expect me to talk, but I still have my voice, and I just used it. Pastor Davis finally seemed to recover his professional composure. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Langston, thank you for your candor. This is clearly a family matter that needs resolution. Perhaps it would be best if—" "With all due respect, Pastor," I interrupted, "this stopped being just a family matter when my daughter used it as a platform to accept awards and praise from this community, when she built a ministry on a foundation of lies." More murmurs from the congregation, louder now. I could see people leaning toward each other, whispering urgently. In the back, someone had stood up and was making their way toward an exit, perhaps uncomfortable with the public airing of dirty laundry. But most remained riveted to their seats, watching the drama unfold. "I don't want to disrupt this service any more than necessary," I continued. "I'm not here for revenge or to cause a scene. I'm here because the truth matters, because I matter." I turned to Cheryl one last time, noticing with a pang how much she resembled me at that moment. The same stubborn set of the jaw, the same flash of defiance in her eyes despite her humiliation. "All I ever wanted was honesty, Cheryl. If you had come to me and said, 'Mom, we can't care for you at home anymore. We've found a place where you'll be safe,' it would have hurt, but I would have understood. I would have had time to prepare, to say goodbye, to bring the things that mattered to me." My voice caught slightly, but I steadied it. "Instead, you lied. You treated me like a child, or worse, like someone whose feelings and dignity didn't matter. And then you abandoned me there. No visits, no calls, nothing but silence while you stood here and elsewhere, talking about compassion for the elderly." Cheryl's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "It wasn't like that," she protested weakly. "You don't understand how difficult it was." "Difficult for whom?" I asked quietly. "For you, having to explain to your children why Grandma wasn't coming back? For Greg, having to adjust the household budget to pay for Sunnyvale? Or for me, waking up every morning in a strange place, surrounded by strangers, abandoned by the people I loved most in the world?" From the front row, Greg finally stood. "That's enough," he said sharply. "You've made your point, Margaret. You've embarrassed your daughter in front of the entire congregation. Are you satisfied now?" Before I could respond, a voice called out from several rows back. "Let her speak, Greg." It was Eleanor Jameson, a woman in her 70s who had taught with me at Westland Elementary for nearly 20 years. "Margaret Langston gave 4 decades of her life to the children of this community," Eleanor continued, rising to her feet. "She deserves to be heard." Another voice joined in, James Wilson, a former school principal. "I've known Margaret for 30 years. If she says she was deceived, I believe her." And then Martha Stevens, who had served on the church building committee with me. "Shame on you, Cheryl. Your mother deserves better." One by one, voices rose in support. Not everyone, but enough. People who had known me for years, who had worked alongside me, worshipped with me, respected me. People who recognized that something profoundly wrong had happened. Cheryl looked around in disbelief as her carefully cultivated image crumbled before her eyes. Her church family, the community whose approval she had always craved, was turning against her, seeing through the facade to the painful truth beneath. I can explain, she stammered, reaching for the microphone. But her words faltered as she faced the collective disapproval of people whose opinions had always mattered so deeply to her. Unable to continue, she grabbed her purse from where it sat near the pulpit and hurried down the steps, practically running down the center aisle toward the exit. Greg quickly gathered the children and followed, shooting me a venomous look as he passed. I stood alone at the pulpit now, watching my daughter flee from the truth. Part of me ached for her, the little girl I had raised, the child I had loved unconditionally, but another part felt a solemn satisfaction. Not joy in her humiliation, but relief that the truth had finally been spoken. Pastor Davis stepped up beside me, clearly eager to regain control of his service. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice professionally soothing, "clearly there has been a misunderstanding within the Bennett family. Let us all take a moment to pray for reconciliation and healing." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Pastor," I said quietly but firmly. "It was wrong. And pretending otherwise, even in the name of peace, only enables more wrong to be done." I turned to face the congregation one last time. "I won't take any more of your Sunday worship. Thank you for listening. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, when my own family tried to make me invisible." As I stepped away from the microphone, something unexpected happened. It started with Eleanor in the back, then spread gradually through the sanctuary. People began to stand. Not everyone, but dozens. Then scores of congregation members rose to their feet in a silent gesture of respect and solidarity. It wasn't wild applause or dramatic cheering. It was something more profound, a quiet acknowledgement of truth spoken to power, of dignity reclaimed, of a wrong recognized. I descended the 3 steps from the pulpit with my head high, feeling the weight of decades lifting from my shoulders. Taylor waited for me at the end of the aisle, her face shining with pride and something like awe. "That," she whispered as she took my arm, "was the bravest thing I've ever seen." We walked together down the aisle, through the still-standing congregation, and out into the bright Virginia sunshine. Behind us, Pastor Davis was valiantly attempting to steer the service back to its intended course. But I knew that nothing in that church would ever be quite the same again. Nor would I.